Hello. Okay, let's talk about the edit panel in Volumator. So the purpose of this panel is to take an existing volume and tweak it in some way to make it better or modify it. The headline feature is the Edit Vertices button, and that will allow us to tweak the individual points that make up the volume. But we have a bunch of other stuff here that we can nudge things and change things in different ways. So yeah, let's have a look at the Edit Vertices button. So I've got a little Pac-Man shape here. Let me just build a quick volume. And because of the way that the Volumator system builds, it sort of filters points down. And so you can sometimes end up with situations like this, or maybe you just want to tweak it for whatever reason. And in cases like that, that's where the Edit Vertices button can be so helpful. So it's like a mode that we enter and we click this. And what it will do is it will convert the volume into a set of points that it puts on a spline. And the spline makes up the perimeter of the volume. And so from this, we can see the problem quite directly. And so sometimes it's handy to enter this mode just to see what's actually happening, even if you're not intending on changing it. But another thing that we can do, if we find that it's a little hard to see what's going on in a busy map, you can also show selected, and that will hide everything except the volume that you've got selected. And this mode will respect the use of that. So that can be really helpful to highlight what it is you're working on. But in this case, I actually want to see the environment a little bit. So let's come back to this. And literally, you just select points and then you can drag them over. And then when you're ready, you've finished your editing, you hit commit. And now the volume is absolutely where we want it to be. And this can also extend to deletion as well. So if these points here we determined are completely unnecessary, and then we can clean it up that way. So it's like a very manual simplification if you prefer working that way. So it can be helpful in a number of ways. It's really useful. And so I definitely encourage you to get in on that action. Now, if we want to go back to the original detected shape, we want to undo our edits. A simple way we can do that is just to hit the regenerate button. And again, as you may have seen in different videos, the detected data is stored in the data component here. And so it will literally just regenerate the volume based on that data. So if we hit regenerate, we're going to lose the little edit that we made. And so that's a handy way to know that you're safe to kind of make adjustments and then reset them if you're not enjoying them. Another thing to keep in mind is you can accumulate edits as well. So if we commit an edit and then we go back to edit, it will remember what you've done. And so we can keep kind of making nudges and changes. And of course, we get constant updates from the quick test here about what bits the detection system picked up and whether or not they are inside the volume that we've created. So that could be really helpful too. Let's have a look at some other real world examples of how we would use the edit mode. Okay, we have an apartment scene here, and I've just generated a volume, and it's done a really good job of it. We've got a couple of little bits though that need tweaking. Now I could keep hammering away at the regeneration button with different settings or use the validation system, but there's some cases where it's actually gone into an adjoining room, and that can be a little bit harder to fix with regeneration sometimes. And it would just be easier if I could just get in there and tweak the vertices directly. So let's do that. So if I switch to editing mode, you can see here that the point doesn't go to the edge here. And so instead of trying to fix that with just rescanning it, we could just directly move it. And you get good feedback here on whether or not it's into the geometry or not. So we can tell really easily whether or not we've fixed it satisfactorily or not. I can commit. And now the volume comes right to the edge here. I think we have another one here. So let's take a look at this. And I can see how it's become a bit of a problem here. So what I'm going to do is just grab this one, move it to the edge here, and I'm going to stretch this one out a little bit. Now, volume covers the space perfectly, and it only took me a few seconds to do it. So the goal of this mode is to make volume editing super easy and fast. And of course, you can use Unreal's built-in modeling tools. They're super powerful, but it can be a bit overkill for working on volumes. And so this system is considerably faster and more geared towards the sort of work you'll be doing here. So as this panel is designed to work with existing volumes, we do have the regenerate volume and recall settings buttons. They're also available in the build and automate panels, but they're here too, just so that you don't have to keep flicking panels. And so not only will this reset any changes that you've done with the edit vertices, but you can also just use it generally to regenerate the volume with different settings, as I've discussed in other videos. And of course, you can also recall the settings from the volume and push it to the widget. So I just regenerated this with 1000 resolution, and I've changed the resolution in the widget. Now, if I want to update the widget to the settings from the volume so that I can then tweak them a little bit, I can just recall, and then this updates it to 1000. I can say, okay, I'm going to just lower a little bit and then regenerate, etc., etc. So that's kind of handy to have that right there for you. We've got a couple of handy buttons here to reset the volume location and rotation and scale. And that's just so that you have the freedom to move the position of the volume and know that you can reset it at any time like this. And the reason why that's important is because, as you can imagine, this is now going to create errors here. And if we do a quick test, you can see all the points that were detected that aren't inside the volume. And so if you ever move the volume because you're trying to see if you can get a good place to have it, you can just know that you can reset it here and then it will resolve everything. And that also applies obviously to scaling and rotation as well. It's unlikely you'll want to adjust rotation, but scaling can be beneficial in certain cases. In this case, it won't work because we have a shape that's just going to get pushed away from the wall here. So obviously that's problematic. And in that case, it is better to instead use the expand amount. So we're going to recall settings, increase the expand amount, regenerate, and you can see we've just enlarged the volume. Okay, next up we have a couple of repair operations. These aren't commonly used, but they're there if you need them. So the first one will fix the opacity shape. If you're using opacity and non-simple opacity, it will just make sure that they're synced to the shape of the volume. The few cases that I've found where this is necessary is when Unreal hasn't picked up the undo operation and reverted the shape of the opacity mesh. So as an example, we have a volume here that was made with 200 resolution. If I bump this up to 1000, you can see now the volume's a different shape. If we undo this, the actual volume has changed shape. Here's the volume here, but the opacity on the volume visualizer component has not been undone. And so in order to fix that, you can just press the repair opacity, and then that will suddenly snap it back into position. So this seems to only affect things like undo. And of course, it won't be a problem if you regenerate because that process is automatically run. But it's there if you need it. And of course, it only affects if you have opacity on and simple opacity off. The repair volumes mesh button runs a suite of operations on the mesh itself on the volume, and that will clean up any weird issues that you've got on the volume. It's not normally needed. I've only needed it a few times when subtracting or combining volumes, but it's there in case you notice any odd behavior with your volume mesh. The only other thing it will do is it will lock in any scale and rotation on the mesh, and it will make it the new normal, and it will reset the scale. So for example, if I make this larger and then I repair, then it's now made the scale 111. So if I reset the scale, it will reset to how we'd set it when we hit the repair button. The subtract and combine volumes buttons work with pairs of volumes, and they allow you to cut one volume away from another and combine two volumes into one. Let's look at subtract first. So in this example here, we have one volume here that nicely follows the contour of this side of the room, and this one here, unfortunately, bleeds over into the other room. And maybe in this case, this is a problem, and we want to have exclusive volumes for the two rooms. This one covers this side, and this one covers this side, and they don't overlap at all. So what we can do is we can cut away the shape of this volume from this volume. So we select our volume to be cut from first, and then we select the volume that's going to do the cutting, and then we hit subtract volume. And it retains the other volume. The second volume isn't touched in any way, but the first volume, as you can see, has had a shape cut out of it that matches the shape of the intersection between the two volumes. So it's a really handy way if you need to sort of carve out the space of one volume from another. Now, in this case, you can see it's added a fair bit of complexity. And so you want to make sure that the volume that's doing the cutting is nice and simplified. So in the case of combining volumes, this can be really helpful when creating compound volumes made up of multiple volumes. In this example here, we've got two floors, which would be very difficult to generate this shape in a Volumator, but we can create two volumes, one for each floor, and another one, this floor here. And then by selecting them and making sure that they overlap, so I'm going to scale it up a little bit, and then selecting the second volume, come over to our edit screen and we hit combine, and it creates a single volume, deletes the second volume, replaces the first volume with the compound. And this is actually an example where repair can sometimes be handy. It can sometimes be necessary if you've got a very complex shape. It will help clean that up really nicely. But combining is helpful when you've got different floors like this, or when you've got different areas that are just very, very difficult for Volumator to build. And combining separate ones can do a really good job of that. And finally, we have the tweak buttons, and these are really handy for just nudging settings on a volume. So let's say that we want to adjust the resolution on this volume. Of course, one way we can do that is to recall the settings and then adjust it and then regenerate. But wouldn't it be nicer if we could just press a button and nudge it up and down really, really quickly? And that's what these buttons do. So if we press +5, it'll add 5 to whatever the current resolution is on the volume. So it doesn't actually matter what you have set in the widget. is just going to adjust based on what's already there. And if we press reset, it will take it back to what was used to generate the volume originally. And of course, we can do this to the expand amount, making it slightly larger, take it back to the original. It won't go any lower than 0. And so this is literally as detected, which is why all the warnings show up, because the edge of the volume is now right on those geometry points. And it will max out pretty high. And in some cases, it will actually break the shape of the volume, so you want to keep an eye on that. Resolution will actually get so high that it stops representing the shape very well, such as like this. And it will go as low as the min point distance will allow it to. And the simplification goes up to +30. And that will also pretty nastily affect the shape here too. But there might be cases where that works for you. So they're really handy to just see what the effect of those changes would be. And if at any point you want to set explicit settings, you can just do that here, regenerate, and then you'll get what those settings are. Or press reset and go back to the originally detected settings. So that's the edit panel. Lots of features there to help you improve your volumes.